Hello. Welcome back to the Sheffield DM number 10 live stream. This is the bi-monthly digital marketing event in Sheffield, where we have amazing content all day for you. Big thanks to everyone who's been watching so far, and to everyone who's tuning in, and for the excellent speakers and panelists we've had so far, and for the excellent panelists we have coming up as well. Earlier today, we were joined by some fab guests who shared their knowledge and expertise in SEO and PPC. And for part 3, we're entering the fascinating and ever-growing world of the digital juggernaut that is digital PR. You're definitely being treated with this one, as we have 3 special guest speakers who are here to share their knowledge, insights, and creative digital PR strategies. As with before, if you have any questions for any of our guests, please share in the comments section on next to the video on YouTube, and we'll be sure they are asked, time permitting. You can also find us on Twitter at Sheffield DM and get involved there if you wish. Give us a follow and give the speakers a follow as well, and generally share the love. We can't guarantee there won't be a little bit of bad language in the upcoming talks, but everyone, to be fair, has been very well behaved so far. So I'm very happy to introduce our first guest for part 3. Abi Bennetts is a digital PR strategist at Digitaloft, as well as author of digital PR and link building newsletter, Work in Progress. Hi, Abi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Just had a nice lunch. Enjoying this so far today. It's been good.
Yeah, it's been a really good day so far. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. How's work at the minute for you then?
Yeah, it's good. It's very busy. Lots going on, and I'm craving being back in the office. To be honest, I'm going a bit mental in my little flat, but yeah, no, all good stuff. Cannot complain.
It's interesting how there's such a broad range of opinions about the work remotely versus in the office thing. Personally, I quite like to have a bit of a mix. I think
yeah.
That's but,
yeah, I agree. Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, if you're ready, they're all yours. Thanks once again for joining us, and take it away.
Lovely. Cool. So thanks again for having me today. And today I'm going to be speaking to you about psychology principles to power your digital PR success. So this might seem a little bit random, like a bit of a random link for some people, but actually this is combining 2 of my greatest passions, because I've been working in digital PR for about 2 years now, but I actually did my undergraduate degree in psychology. And I've been interested in psychology since I was really young. I've always loved watching how people interact and how every experience that a person has affects them in some way later on in their life. So before I start talking about how these psychological principles can be used in digital PR, I thought it might be useful to just give you a quick basic definition of what digital PR is. So it's all about creating and promoting contagiously creative content, which gets people talking. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Well, it's all about using data-driven assets and PR tactics to build links, which increase a site's authority and lead to higher rankings. But actually, digital PR can do a whole lot more than this. It can help build brand awareness, it can help build trust and social engagement, it can help with authority building, and it can help drive referral traffic. So actually, just like any sort of marketing tactic, digital PR is all about persuading our audiences to either buy a product or invest in a service. So I want to take you back then to when I first started out in digital PR, and one of my colleagues at the time recommended that I read this book, which is called The Webs of Influence. And this is by Natalie Lahai. And when I was reading this, I started to notice all the different ways in which psychology feeds into what we're trying to achieve as marketers and PRs. And this book basically uses the latest research in psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics to explain the underlying motivations behind consumer behavior. So it basically helps us engage with our audiences more effectively. And this book talks a lot about the psychology of decision making. And what it basically says is that we have 2 systems in our brain that helps us make a decision. So we have system 1. So this is very instinctive, automatic, it's quite emotional, and it's unconscious. So it's constantly running in the background without us really noticing. And I always use this example, which I think says a lot about my decision making. But if you're feeling very stressed or you're feeling very hungry, this system 1 side of the brain is going to be the side of the brain that makes you want to reach for a big bar of chocolate or a massive bag of crisps. On the other hand, then we have system 2. So this is kind of the opposite to system 1. It's very rational, it's logical, it's slower because it takes more time to consider all of the factors before it makes decisions. So if you're feeling stressed and hungry and you see that big bar of chocolate, the system 2 is going to be the one reining you back in and thinking, okay, what time am I having dinner? How many calories are in this chocolate bar? So while we all like to think that we're using system 2 all of the time, we like to think we're rational human beings. System 1 is the one that's making all of our decisions. So system 1 is generating feelings and intentions, which only if it's endorsed by system 2 will turn into actions. So when we're using our system 1 to make decisions, it needs a little bit of help. It needs something to try and rationalize what it's doing. And this is where cognitive heuristics come in. And cognitive heuristics are basically mental shortcuts or rules of thumb that help speed up our decision-making process. And a really good example of this is the fact that I am deathly scared of sharks. So according to the International Shark Attack File, there was around, I think it was 66 unprovoked shark attacks in the whole world last year. So why, when I'm like paddling on the south coast of Cornwall, that I think I'm literally going to die by shark attack, I'm not really sure, because that's clearly not going to happen. But actually, this is a really great example of what we call the availability heuristic. And this means that despite all the rational information in my brain that's telling me, like, you're like 2 meters into the water, you're clearly not going to get eaten by a shark, my brain jumps to the most recent, the most frequent, the most extreme, and the most vivid information in my head. So I'm going back to all those times that my mum and dad told me as a kid to watch out for sharks. I'm thinking of all the horror films like Jaws, or like those awful episodes of Baywatch where people like blood in the sea and just awful. That is where my brain's going. And so that's how I'm making that decision to be scared of sharks. So going back to Natalie Nahai's book then, she says that we should be taking advantage of these kind of heuristics to help us with our marketing and PR. And when she talks about taking advantage of these heuristics, she talks about this guy. And this guy is called Robert Cialdini, and he basically wrote a really good book on the psychology of persuasion, which I'd highly recommend if you haven't read already. And basically in this book, he lays out his 6 principles of persuading audiences. And these are basically 6 key heuristics that if we can tap into, then we're much more able to persuade our audiences to make them do what we want. So with this in mind, then I'm going to whiz you through these 6 key heuristics and how we can use them to power our digital PR success. So the first principle then is reciprocity. And this is all about giving something away with the expectation that you'll get something back. So essentially, we are hardwired to repay what someone else has given to us. So why not give journalists the gift of a great pitch? So news publications are closing down left, right and centre. Only the other week, MSN shut down. The countless publications are shutting, it seems, month on month. And what it means is that as PRs, we're constantly trying to fight for the attention of a journalist in their inbox when they're receiving thousands of emails every single day. So we need to be giving them something that they can't resist. They just can't help but write about. So we need to provide them everything they could want in a pitch email. So that could include links to raw data sources, quotes from industry experts that add value or opinion, currencies converted depending on the nationality of the publication and the journalist, and links to folders of high-res images. So our first principle then is reciprocity. So we're hardwired to repay what another person has given to us. So give journalists everything they could want, give them the gift of a great pitch with the expectation that they'll give something back, which what we're all aiming for is linked coverage. So the second principle then is consistency. And this means that when we're confronted with a choice, we'll construct stories and select facts that fit with our decisions in order to justify our actions. And this is actually much more pronounced when it comes to our feelings and our beliefs. So that's why it's much more effective to persuade people with emotional rather than rational appeals. And by emotional appeals, I don't mean that you should send a really emotional pitch email like begging journalists to cover your content. What I actually mean is that we should be tapping into emotion in our campaigns. So I have an example here of a campaign that we created for a client a few years back, and this is the NHS car parking index. And this did really well for the client. It earned over 35 unique links from 35 unique domains. And I think the reason why this did so well is because it taps into 2 of the things that Brits just love to hate, the cost of car parking and the NHS. Like, you either love it or you hate it. And even in the intro copy here, you can see it's been estimated that the NHS rakes in around £272 million a year from car parking charges in what has been deemed a tax on the sick. So all the coverage surrounding this was all about tapping into our audience's emotions and getting them enraged by how much it costs to park in a hospital when you're visiting your loved ones. So on a slightly larger scale then, we have the You versus the Kardashians calculator that we launched a couple of years ago for a client. And this earned links from over 220 unique domains. And this kind of blew up, I think, again, because it's really tapping into the emotion of our audience. So no one likes to talk about their salary, right? Because we equate money and our salary with our self-worth. So no one's really out there shouting about how much they're earning. And then when you compare that to the like colossal amount that these celebrities are earning, I think they literally could earn our annual salary in like minutes. I said days the other day and someone was like, whoa, how much are you earning? It's not days, it's like minutes, it's mega. And you can kind of see this in the coverage that we secured for this campaign. So how long would it take for Kim Kardashian to earn your salary? If you'd like to ruin your day, the answer awaits. So here then we're really tapping into that emotional, the emotional thing in our audience that's going to make them click on it and be like, what the hell? I work really hard for my money and these guys are just flitting around earning my money in 2 seconds. So going back to the system 1 and the system 2 then, we need to make sure that our content is tapping into the system 1 so that our audiences, whether that be the readers or the journalists, are having an automatic emotional reaction. So if a journalist is receiving a pitch that really sparks that emotional reaction in them, and then they can justify that with a system 2 reaction of thinking, okay, this is going to be a really easy story for me to write up because I've got everything I need, that is when we're on to a winner. So consistency then is more effective to use emotion in our content. So we need to try and tap into those emotional topics in our campaigns and try and provoke that automatic emotional reaction. So our third principle today then is social proof, and this is known as herd instinct, hence the sheep. And this basically means that we look to other people for cues on how to behave. So journalists are reading their competitors' titles every single day to see what's breaking, whether it be the Daily Mail, the Sun, all the big news outlets. They're constantly looking around to see what's breaking, what's engaging with audiences. And so we need to be targeting these top tier publications to ensure that other publications are seeing our content. So any digital PR who's landed national coverage will know that this will often spark either another big national or even a blog or another publication to pick up the content. So from an audience perspective as well, then 49% of people use social media to get their news. So we're constantly looking around at other people for our information. So going back to this definition, then we need to be creating that content that gets people talking and sharing with other people. So a really great example of this is the Cosmetify Index. And this is a campaign that we launched for a client. It earned over 100 links. So it's a great success for us and the client. But actually what the real highlight here was that Millie Bobby Brown shared the campaign on her Instagram story. Now, not only have we saved a shed load on influencer marketing here, but if any beauty publication, beauty writer, or beauty influencer is seeing this content, they're much more likely to pick it up and write a story about it. And that just increases tenfold the reach of our campaigns. So social proof then, you want to be creating content that people want to share with others to ensure that you're having a maximum reach of your campaign. And you also want to be targeting big publications such as the Daily Mail or the Sun, as these are where other news publications are getting their stories from. So number 4 is a really simple psychological principle, and it is called liking. And it basically means that we prefer to comply with people that we like. And with a basic psychological principle comes simple advice. Do not piss journalists off. Why? Because it damages the reputation of you, your brand, and the client, which is just going to take more PR to try and salvage. The journalists are going to be less likely to cover your content, even if it's really good. And you'll get outed on Twitter, which is personally my worst nightmare in life. So to not piss journalists off, you need to be making sure that you're getting their name right. So if you're sending an email and a journalist receives an email with their name spelled wrong, or it just isn't their name, you're going to start on the back foot because they're going to have their backs up and looking for things to pick out and be like, well, no, I'm not going to cover that. So make sure that you're following journalists on Twitter to get a better idea of their contact preferences and the things that they like to write about. So you can see, A, what they're writing about themselves, but also what they're engaging with. What other articles are they commenting on and engaging with? And this just gives you a lot better idea of the types of things that journalists are going to want to see in their inbox. And then finally, be polite, be helpful, and give genuine compliments. If it feels appropriate, like we're all human, we can all gauge when it feels nice to make a little joke or make chat. But just make sure that you're being genuine, because no one wants to end up like this PR. And I told you you would get outed on Twitter. So liking then, we prefer to comply with people that we like, so don't piss journalists off. Check that you've got their name right and follow journalists on Twitter to keep up to date with their preferences. So our fifth principle today then is authority. And Natalie Nahai in her book explains how we can use hard tactics such as pressure to secure compliance. And common pressure tactics can include frequent checking and basically, as digital PRs know, follow-ups. So don't neglect your follow-ups. This is a really good chance to be confident and assertive with journalists and remind them why they should be covering your content and that you're here to help them with anything they need and to make their lives easier. But actually, follow-ups aren't the only way that we can be implementing authority in our digital PR strategies. So the best campaigns, aren't promotional, but they do position you or your client as an industry expert. So according to Robert Cialdini, there are 3 factors that trigger the authority principle. So we have number 1, which is titles, which is clothes, a nice shirt, a nice suit, stuff like that. Oh, sorry, that's clothes. So titles is all about jobs. So jobs like doctors and lawyers and nutrition expert. Then number 2 is clothes. So the nice shirt that I was so willing to show off and the suit. And then 3 is trappings. So that could be anything from a nice watch to a nice car. So while we can't really show off our clothes or trappings when we're writing pitch emails, we can really be using titles in our content to enhance the authority of our campaigns. So we need to be using our clients' expertise or existing content to enhance their authority and create stories that position them in their field. So an example of this is we had a client in the fitness industry. We hadn't yet launched a campaign, but we wanted to keep building links. So we had a look at their internal content and found that they'd written a blog about how to make your weekly shop last for 2 weeks, which isn't like groundbreaking, but as you can see from the date there, they'd written this a week after lockdown. So we thought this was a really great story because people weren't sure when they were going to get back to the supermarkets. Everyone was understandably quite worried about the whole state of life, as we can all remember. So we decided to pitch it out and secured coverage such as this. So actually, I think this is a really great example of using existing content and our clients' expertise that we haven't even had to make up, like they're already writing that content. And providing valuable advice for people who are unsure what to do in these times. So what I would say here is that if you can't use your own client's expertise, then don't be afraid to reach out and use other titles to enhance the authority of your campaign. So we had a campaign that looked at the average BPM of the world's sexiest songs. And while we felt that our client could comment on sex and sexual relations, we didn't quite feel that they could comment on why music was such a libido enhancing thing. So we reached out to this psychologist who explained that those with similar music tastes have more sex compared to those with different musical interests. And we thought this was a really great story. And as you can see from the coverage, such as on Music Radar, the journalists and the press lapped it up because not only did it give a new angle to our story, but it also re-enhanced the authority of our campaign because an expert who had nothing to do with the client was reinforcing what we were saying. So authority then, we can use tactics such as checking or reminders, so that's being confident in your follow-ups. And we can also use Robert Cialdini's principles of titles. So this is making sure that we're using our client's expertise or reaching out to other experts to enhance the authority of our campaigns. So finally then, we have scarcity. So this is the fact that people tend to value something that's in scarce supply. So for me, that might be if I go on ASOS and there is one midi dress left, even though I've got 1,000, I'll be much more likely to buy it if I know there's only one left in stock than if there's loads. And actually, this principle was proved really well in a study that was conducted in the 1970s. And basically, a group of researchers offered a group of students some cookies, and they had 2 jars. One was brimming to the full, and one was barely full at all. Now, despite the cookies being exactly the same, the group that received the cookies from the less full jar described the cookies as more delicious, more desirable, and more expensive. And actually, we can be using scarcity really easily in our digital PR tactics by offering exclusives. So this is a really great way if you have a piece of content that you know you want to land on a certain publication with a certain journalist, or land your client on their dream publication. You can offer the content exclusively to a journalist. And this is all about dangling the carrot in their inbox. So get their attention and then really create those explicit deadlines. So you're activating that sense of urgency that's they're going to be much more likely to read through the pitch than if you just sent a normal pitch on a normal day. So scarcity, then, people tend to value things that are in scarce supply. So we can create these situations of scarcity and activate that sense of urgency in journalists by offering exclusives and really emphasizing those explicit deadlines. So in summary, then, there are 6 key heuristics that we can be tapping into in our digital PR tactics. We have number 1, reciprocity. Give journalists the gift of a great pitch. Number 2 is consistency, so tap into those emotional topics in our content. Number 3 is social proof, so target those top tier nationals and create content that people want to share. Number 4 is liking, so don't piss journalists off. Number 5 is authority, so be confident in your follow-ups and use titles to enhance the authority of your campaigns. And number 6 is scarcity, so create situations of scarcity by offering exclusives and really emphasizing those deadlines. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Abi. To be honest, I totally share your fear of sharks, and no amount of data will change my mind on that.
No, I'm the same.
No, thanks a lot for that. That was fascinating. There's just one question we've had through, if you don't mind, and this is how do you ensure that the strength that is created from these links translates into increased traffic or conversions? Does this kind of happen naturally, or is there something you do specifically to help that as well?
So when we're creating the campaigns, we'll always create them with these really relevant top tier publications in mind, so that when it comes to launching the campaign, that does kind of happen more naturally. So the content's automatically going to appeal to those top tier, more authoritative sites, so that when they do link, obviously the SEO benefits of that translate quite sort of fluidly and naturally. I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned how that digital PR seems to be quite fundamental to SEO, whilst also being its own complete beast separate from it as well. Do you find it's something that is packaged together more, or is it separate?
I think it depends. Annoying answer. It depends on the client and what they're looking for. In some instances, we have clients that are more leaning towards the sort of PR benefits of digital PR, whereas others are sort of looking for more of the SEO benefits. But actually, when done well, it can achieve both. So it's kind of a win-win. So yeah, it kind of depends. It depends on the client, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that it is okay to say "I depends."
Yeah, I say it all the time.
Most of the time, it does on something, especially with so many different variables. But anyway, thanks so much for joining us, Abi. That was a great talk.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I hope to see you again at Sheffield DM in the future.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you very much. Cool. On we go then to our second digital PR special guest. I'm very pleased to introduce Alex Hickson, who is digital PR executive at Rise at 7, a Sheffield creative SEO agency that we've had the pleasure of having on Sheffield DM before. Hi, Alex.
Hi, you okay?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not bad. It's been a good day so far. So.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it, and I hope the people watching and the speakers have enjoyed it as well. You've only just recently joined Rise at 7, haven't you?
Yeah, so I started on Monday. So it's been amazing getting up to Rise at 7 speed, I think, as quickly as possible. But it's been really exciting already. Like, I feel like what I've done in 4 days is more than I've done in the past couple of months. So
hey, repping the brand in week 1, you must be doing something right.
Yeah, hopefully.
Great, yeah, awesome. Well, I will leave. I will leave it to you. They're all yours. Enjoy your talk. Can't wait.
So hi guys, this is my talk on utilizing social media effectively in PR. So first off, how much are we actually using social media? Well, on average, the UK consumer uses about 2 hours and 24 minutes of social media time a day. So to sort of put that into context, it's about the same runtime as the first Avengers movie. So it's a pretty big chunk of your day, I'd say. But then if you are working in PR, you might find that you're spending a hell of a lot more time on social media, because I know that I am. So this is my screen time app, and it tells me that I'm spending about 5 hours and 47 minutes a day on socials. So some of that is like messages and WhatsApp, but as you can see, I'm spending nearly 2 hours a day on Twitter, for example. So if I'm spending this much time of my day on social media, how am I making sure that I'm utilizing it effectively? And that starts with the platforms that I'm using. So this is just an example of some of the social media platforms that I have. Some of them I use just for personal use, some strictly professional, and most of them now are a bit of a blend of both. Things like Snapchat and Facebook, I wouldn't necessarily say I use them for work, but that's not to say that I don't get inspired with ideas from them. Instagram is becoming a bit of a blurred one. It's still a bit of a window into my soul. It's just bad selfies and pictures of food and pictures of my travels. But the more creative work that I'm doing, especially now I've joined Rise, it's going to showcase a lot more of my work. And then the one that I use mostly is Twitter. And you might see that I have 2 Twitter accounts there. So some of you might already follow me at Alex Hickson PR. And that's a Twitter account that I set up a year ago just to keep up to date with what was going on in the industry, connect with journalists and things like that. But my other Twitter account is the one that I've had for probably about 10 years. I'm not ashamed of it. There's nothing embarrassing on there. It's just what I use to catch up with friends. I've got people from school on there, family, just funny Twitter accounts to follow. And for me, it's a good way to separate the two. I like to use Twitter as a bit of downtime as well. And I'll try in an evening to switch over from my PR Twitter to my personal one. And then finally, as well, you can see I've got TikTok. So I probably absorb a lot more content on TikTok than I create. But I think the way that it's changing the way we digest content is really interesting. And I'll touch on that in a bit. So the agenda, how do I actually consider social media for my job? Well, in 3 ways mainly. It's helps me to get inspired for campaigns first and foremost. And then it also helps me formulate the strategy of those campaigns. And then finally, it can really assist me when it comes to outreaching them. And then also it helps to build my personal brand, which I will touch on a little bit at the end. So inspiration. When I consider inspiration and how I get inspired from social media, it's usually sort of a 3-pronged attack. It's with trending topics, shareable content, and competitor campaigns. So trending topics. As Abi said before, social media is often the first place now where I go for news. I go to Twitter for my news. If anything breaks, whether it's political or business or pop culture, I'll go on Twitter, and 9 times out of 10, I'll see it straight away. That's not to say Twitter is the only place. I just find it the best in terms of getting news quickly. The second image you can see is actually from Snapchat. So I mentioned I get a bit of inspiration from Snapchat. Publications like The Sun, for example, have journalists that sit on a dedicated Snapchat desk. So you often see that campaigns that are image heavy or have a lot of infographics are actually pushed on The Sun Snapchat story quite often. And a lot of the time they are PR campaigns. So if you're coming up with a campaign that sort of fits this bill, it's always worth seeing who's sitting on the Snapchat desk on a particular day that you're outreaching, because it's a really good platform to put your campaign on that you might not necessarily have thought of. And then the third image you can see is TikTok. So I think people still have this assumption that TikTok's just a platform where you can watch some really funny lip syncs of people and they're doing dance challenges and stuff. But if you look at actually what's trending on TikTok, some of it's actually sort of quite engaging. This was a screen grab I did from the other day, and one of the top trends was hashtag CEO of CVs. So people were sharing little videos with like tips on job hunting, how people can improve their CV. And some of it was really valuable stuff. I think that the way TikTok is limited to 60-second videos is actually now changing the way that we digest information. I think people are returning to being short and snappy and getting to the point, which is something I'm a fan of. But previously to that, with like Instagram and maybe Instagram stories and also YouTube, people could take 10 minutes to talk around a topic, whereas TikTok is limiting that to 60 seconds. So it's a challenge, but I also think it's a new opportunity for people and also for brands. So how have I actually been inspired in a real life campaign? So this is an example that I did just before Christmas from my last agency. And long story short, I was working with a healthcare client that specialised in like bariatric surgery. So it wasn't always spoken about too positively in the media. But I needed a really quick reactive piece to compensate for a delay that was on the client side. And I was sort of racking my brain and I thought, what can I do? And I'd seen a few conversations on Twitter sort of hyping up the return of like the Christmas coffee menu. So like your Starbucks gingerbread latte and your bonfire spice latte and things like that. And the more I looked into it, the more I could see this anticipation building. So I started to look at the sugar content that was in some of these drinks. And it turned out that in some of them, it had like 4 times the amount of your daily recommended average. So I got some comments from the dietitians that we already worked with the client, and managed to push this piece out. And it did really, really well. It got sort of 100 plus links, got spoken about on the TV, got spoken about on the radio. But I would never in a million years have thought to do it if I'd not seen these conversations already happening on social media. The graph that you can see is actually an analysis from Google Trends, but what it shows is that the conversations had started to build and there was an interest in it sort of the end of October. And then it really took off just as our campaign went live, which I think was absolutely crucial. And obviously with it being Christmas related, it dropped down really quickly. So it just sort of highlights the importance of, if you do spot something you think could be good, try and react as fast as you can. So shareable content. And when I talk about shareable content, I kind of want to talk about memes. We live and we absolutely breathe them. So of course brands are going to want to use them too. But I always think it's really important to think, are they appropriate? If I was a comedian and I wanted to obviously impress my audience and do a stand-up routine, I always have to focus on the punchline. So if you're trying to create some sort of humorous content or a meme that's going to be used by a brand, you've got to make sure it's going to land with the audience. Some of the ones I remember aren't necessarily ones for the right reasons. I remember seeing, I think it was from like a business to business payment tech brand. And they did some sort of meme content on social media asking other businesses to couple up with them. And they tried to tie it into that series of Love Island in the summer. And it wasn't a bad effort, but just for the businesses that they were approaching and the sort of audience that they had, it didn't really land very well. And as I said, I remember it and I laughed, but I can't say I laughed for the right reasons. So you've just got to make sure that it's appropriate for what you're doing. But also, as I mentioned, the way we're digesting content is always changing. So TikTok's a good example. This is Gymshark, and Gymshark have absolutely smashed what they put out on TikTok. It gets really, really well engaged with. They've got a lot of followers. I think it's over 1 million, nearly 2 million now. But that's not to say that the only brands that can do well on channels like TikTok are sort of young lifestyle type brands. One of the best TikTok campaigns I've seen recently was actually from the United Nations. And what they've done is they've taken some quite complex topics around child poverty and child slavery. They'd condensed it, but quite tastefully, into a 60-second video and then pushed it out. And because of TikTok's algorithm and the way that they understood that, it was getting in front of people that wouldn't necessarily have gone to seek out what the UN were doing. But they managed to get some really, really good engagement because of that. And then competitor campaigns. So everyone in digital PR loves to talk about what they're up to, and rightly so, because some of the work that is done is absolutely unreal. So I find that following other agencies is really, really helpful. So you might recognize some of these. The top left image was a campaign called Future of the Office Worker, which was followed by The Future of the Gamer by Rise at 7, and then more recently followed by The Future of a Remote Worker, which was by Kaizen earlier this year. And you can sort of tell that the format of these campaigns aren't too dissimilar. It's sort of taking the situation and the circumstances of a type of person now and predicting how that might impact them in the future. But the reason why all 3 of these campaigns are brilliant is because they saw the format that did really well, and then they pivoted it and made it work really well because of a trending topic. So the recent example with Kaizen, this came out just after we'd been put into lockdown. There was a lot of uncertainty about how long we were going to be working from home, and it managed to break through. And it's sort of quite a humorous topic in what was quite a dark news cycle at that time. And then I think everyone will have seen one of these at some point. This is the infamous dream job. This was the first one I could find. So I think it was back from 2014, advertising for a bathtub tester, but it's been recreated tenfold. I could have filled slides with these, but you can be a travel and interior design. There was a really good one from Spa Seekers a few years ago. And a lot of people think, oh God, really? Are people still churning out a dream job campaign? Well, yeah, people are. You can see that this was actually from 2 weeks ago. Supermac, which is a brand in Ireland, were hiring for an ice cream tester. And you might think it's not the most original of formats, but it's obviously still getting links and getting results for the brand. And even since putting this deck together, I've seen this campaign elsewhere. So you might not be reinventing the wheel, but if you can jump on something that's topical, it doesn't mean you're not going to get success. So strategy. When I'm trying to formulate my strategy or formulate a social media strategy specifically, or the strategy for my campaign in the long run, I always consider 3 things, and this is what social media helps me with. What gap is that filling? I also think about if I'm doing reactive PR or newsjacking, and I also always consider what am I trying to achieve that is more than just links. So consider the gaps, and this kind of touches a lot on like the psychology principles that Abi was talking about, but social media is a massive part of this for me. First, I always consider knowledge. So is your campaign answering somebody's question? And it doesn't matter what question that is. It could be, where's the best place in the world to start a business? Or it could be, what is the favorite sex position amongst millennials? Thing is, both them questions will be on somebody's lips, or they might be on the same person's lips, you don't know. But you've got to consider as well, is there a demand for the story that you're telling? And I think social media is a great way to figure that out, especially if you start to consider the emotional gaps. So anything that I do, any campaign that I work on, I always think, what emotion is this going to evoke? Is it happiness? Is it shock? Is it sadness? Do I want to make people laugh? I think a journalist always knows what their readers want. So if you can tap into that on an emotional level, you're going to get that desired amplification. So we spoke a bit about like virality and stuff before. If you think of any viral content that pops up on any of your feeds, there's a reason why that's gone viral. It's not got thousands and millions of retweets or shares because it's just an all right video. It's made you laugh, or it's warmed your heart, or it's made you cry, and it has them emotional triggers. So if you really want a campaign, not just to do well in terms of links, but really blow up and get people talking, what emotional response are you trying to evoke from them? And then finally, I think about the conversational gap. So are you about to enter a conversation? And as I said with that example before, I knew that people were talking about the essence of my campaign. But then I also have to think about, can you create a campaign that is based off that hot topic? Are you able to give a fresh perspective? Just because it's being talked about on social media by thousands of people doesn't mean the campaign's going to do well. Because if you're saying the same thing as countless other people, how are you making sure that it's going to break through the noise? So newsjacking, I thought I couldn't do a talk on PR and social media without talking about newsjacking. So social media is integral to reactive PR strategies, and Twitter for me is the main one. The first thing any PR should be doing is following #journal request. It's a great way to get like reactive links and coverage, and it also gives you a great insight into the demand for what journalists are writing about at the moment. And what I found is that even if I don't have a client that could necessarily help someone that's put a journal request out, it's a great way to build relationships. So the amount of times I've opened a dialogue with a journalist, knowing full well that I might not have what they want, but I've told them a little bit about the clients that I'm representing and the campaigns that I'm working on. And then further down the line, they've been like, oh, Alex, actually, I'm now preparing something on that. Do you have someone that could give me a comment? And you sort of open the doors that way. And another way that's really good is depending on what your client base is. Certain Twitter accounts are really, really good for breaking news. So an example is BBC Business for me. They're usually quite hot off the mark with their breaking news. So I just make sure that on my PR Twitter, I have them alerts subscribed to. So if I'm out for lunch or not in the office, or it's quite late at night and I get the notification through, if it's really worth my client commenting on, I can act faster, hopefully, than other people. And finally, when it comes to strategy, are links all that you're after? These 2 stunning photos of me with Instagram fillers on my forehead are examples of 2 campaigns by Rise at 7. So one was for Spa Seekers and one was for Park Dean. It's part of a social media strategy that's gone a step further. At the end of the day, the campaigns themselves were brilliant. They've managed to get coverage on their own. So are these Instagram filters necessary? Maybe not, but think bigger than that. And the reason you've got to think bigger than that is because it's a method of perpetuating that noise. If you find that maybe the coverage on a campaign is sort of coming to a natural end, have you thought about social media and your social media strategy to see if you could perpetuate that? Or even if that social media tactic could become a story in itself and get a further onslaught of links? I think you've always got to be prepared to go again and really milk it for what it's worth. So this is just a good example as well of why social engagement I find is really important and why it doesn't always come from where you'd expect. So again, this is an example from my last agency that I ran last year for Bloom and Wild. And it basically just was a campaign talking through the most popular baby names of 2020 that have been predicted. And it did really, really well. I think we got like 80 plus links on like some really high domain authority sites, which the client was really happy with. But these are just 3 examples. So it got on Marie Claire, it got on the Metro, and then it also got featured amongst a lot of like mummy blogs and sort of like new parent sites, which didn't have as much domain authority. But when I did a bit of an analysis of the social media engagement, it wasn't the big high domain authority sites that had got the social media engagement. It was the mummy pages. So the mummy pages, I think, had 6 times the engagement on social media than any other link that we acquired for this campaign. And the reason was for this wasn't just because, you know, it was luck. It's because this campaign was perfect for that type of publication. Everyone who reads that publication is really invested in this kind of stuff. I knew that it was expectant mothers or new parents, and therefore it opened a conversation amongst people on social media, and it sort of catapulted the campaign amongst audiences that the casual reader of the Metro or the casual reader of the Marie Claire wouldn't necessarily engage with on the same level. So finally, outreach. How do I use social media to assist in the outreach of my campaigns? Basically, again, I consider 3 things. The journalist connections that I'm making, and on those connections, how am I opening a conversation? And also consider my own personal brand. So making useful connections. Believe it or not, journalists are humans. And I think, as stupid as it sounds, we can forget that at times. They're real people with likes and dislikes and flaws, just like us PRs, just like the rest of us. And the reason I remember finding that out is because this is Lorraine Candy, and she was the former editor of the Sunday Times Style. So the Sunday Times Style is quite a sort of a highbrow, like fashion and lifestyle magazine and a supplement to the Sunday Times. But I also know that Lorraine Candy has a massive interest in open water swimming. And you might be thinking, like, Alex, how is this relevant? Why on earth would Lorraine Candy write about open water swimming in the Sunday Times Style? Well, she wouldn't at all. But a really clever PR knew this, and they managed to find out that she was an avid fan of open water swimming just from a little stalk of her Instagram and Twitter, which was completely public. It was out there to be seen. And because of that, they pitched her a campaign that they were doing around open water swimming and were really frank. They said, look, Lorraine, we know this isn't going to go in your publication, but we thought it might be of interest. We'd really like it if it would actually go in the Sunday Times, because it hadn't got the interest that they'd wanted from journos at the Sunday Times. So Lorraine fought this story's cause, and it did end up getting covered in the Sunday Times. So it just goes to show that even though you can't see these sort of tangible links between journalists' interests and what they write about, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get results in a bit of a roundabout way. And then how do you open a conversation over social media? So I think since COVID's hit, it's become even more integral. Do I think that the journalist lunch is dead? Not necessarily. Like, I've taken journalists out for lunch, I've been for drinks with them, but the majority of relationships I have with them have been formed mainly over Twitter. And the way that that's been done is by sharing a conversation. So I had a financial journalist that used to come to me quite regularly asking for commentary from a client. And I didn't open that conversation by talking about the FTSE or the stock markets. I think we got talking about LGBT rights, and then we got talking about pop culture. And then before you knew it, we were talking about the clients that I represented and things like that. So that's where personal branding, I think, comes into it. As much as I'm not that much of a fan of the term, I think personal branding can sort of make it sound like it has to be a conscious effort, and it has to be something that you consciously work on. Whereas I think authenticity is what people want the most. You don't build friendships by sort of actively doing it. It comes a lot more naturally than that. And I think it's just key to remember that your personality is your biggest selling point. As a PR, you are doing the same job as multiple other people, but your personality is what sets you apart. So use it. The way that you conduct yourself on what you consider to be your professional social media pages doesn't have to be really corporate or really reserved. You can interject elements of your personality and make sure you know where the line is drawn. So that's all from me, folks. I'm happy to answer any questions. As I've mentioned, I'm on Twitter way too much of the day. So feel free to tweet me at Alex Hickson PR. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Alex. I really enjoyed that. That was excellent. The only question I think the only question the question I had personally was, so if you're a young, say you're a third year student looking for a career move, and digital PR seems to be something that would appeal to a lot of people of that demographic. Is there any advice you'd give for people just about to leave uni or wanting to get involved in this stuff? Because it does look like the dream job for people who spend loads of time on social media, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose make noise. It sounds quite sort of basic, but I think that it's quite a competitive industry, and I think there's a lot of thought of, well, how can I be different? What can I do that sort of reinvents the wheel and is completely different to what other people are doing? You don't have to have those ideas all the time, because your perspective on it is different than somebody else's. And I think it does kind of go back to, you can teach skills and stuff, but you can't teach personality. Your personality is quite unique to you. So if you can understand the unique elements of yourself that you can give to an agency or sort of another company that you do PR for, then that's your selling point, which I don't think people necessarily always think.
Oh. Well, cheers for that. Thank you very much for joining us, and
No problem.
It's been great. I hope you've enjoyed it. It'd be great to see you again at another Sheffield DM.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, that brings us to our third and final guest for part 3. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Laura Hampton, a self-proclaimed digital nerd and head of digital PR at Impression Digital.
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. It's quite warm up in this room, but I'm getting through it.
Those two talks are absolutely brilliant. Thanks so much to Abi and Alex for sharing their thoughts.
Yeah, the caliber of speakers today has been sensational.
Yeah, I'm not nervous at all to follow that.
Right, we'll get you set up very shortly.
Wonderful.
Slight technical delay, but we will get there.
Cool. Shall I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, you've got your slides ready, yeah.
Wonderful. So that should all be available to you now. Is that right?
Let's find out. There it is. Excellent. Right. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, so hi everyone, my name's Laura. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. And I'm going to be talking about maximising digital PR success through clear KPIs and fair expectations. I've also popped a little URL up on the screen there, impression.tips/Laura Sheffield DM. So you can go there after the talk and get hold of all my slides and some extra resources for you as well. So let's get started. Failure. No, let's reframe that. Challenge. Now, this is something that I believe is it's an inherent part of the role that we do, whether your job is as a digital PR, as an SEO in PPC, broader marketing. The reality of our role is that there is no right or wrong answer. So inevitably, the pathways that we take, the journeys that we go on in achieving success are going to have some bumps along the way, and we're going to have to face challenges on a fairly regular basis. Now, this is something that I've seen being talked about more and more frequently, particularly over lockdown. And it's totally fair that we talk about it. But what I want to put forward over the course of the next 20 minutes is my belief that our job is difficult because it's meant to be difficult. We are earning the opportunity to speak to people. We are earning high value links, earning those placements that enable our clients to speak to new audiences. So because it's about earning those opportunities, it's going to be difficult, and that's fair enough. So what I want for us to do as an industry is to move up the conversation away from what it means to fail and to focus more on what it means to succeed. So over the course of the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk to you all about, firstly, how to define what success looks like in a meaningful way. Secondly, how to craft strategies that have the best chance of success. And then thirdly, how to reflect and learn from everything that we do. So what does good look like? How can we define success? These are just a few of the placements that my team has been able to get for our clients over the course of the last month. And of course, it's always incredibly exciting when you can get featured in really high profile publications. It's always great to be able to see that you've hit the nationals or that you've got into publications that have got broad audiences. And absolutely, that's something that we want to celebrate. But actually, the crux of our role is really about link building primarily. So links are an essential part of any organic growth strategy because it's those links that tell Google that our client or our own websites deserve to be seen in the search results pages. So in the most basic definition of our role, we need to be building links. Ideally, links without the nofollow attribute, but links nonetheless. So that is the first definition of success from a PR perspective. However, that's not to say that we shouldn't recognise the broader benefits of what we do at the same time. So the purpose of the output of links is often to support the broader outcomes. So things like building awareness amongst our audiences, driving interest in our products, creating desire that leads people to conversion. Those things are all kind of the bigger picture goals that we're aiming towards. So I'm going to share something with you that we do at Impression that helps us to really define what success looks like. And the way that we do that is in terms of what we call owned goals and shared goals. So firstly, owned goals. What do I mean by that? Well, owned goals are those things that we can directly influence as digital PR professionals. And that includes things like the number of links, so how many links we actually get into our client's website. The quality of links, so maybe we'll define that through domain authority scores or domain rating scores, or maybe you've got your other metrics to be able to define what quality looks like. The relevance of links, so how close to our client's brand are the publications in which we feature, or how close to the brand are the topics of our content that we're placing. And also the placement of links. So when we consider the value of link equity, as we sometimes call it, how those links are kind of passing value into our website can have a really stark effect on the eventual outcome of those links. So those are the things that we can really own as digital PRs. But what we also need to do is recognise that those outputs that we could take ownership of are usually feeding into a broader set of goals. And that's where these shared goals come in. So those might be things like keyword rankings, traffic, sales. Maybe it's about audience motivation. Maybe it's about tapping into a new country. Maybe it's about selling a particular product. Whatever it is, it's really important that we as PR professionals define our success and recognise both the side of the work that we do that we can directly control and influence, and also the side of what we're doing that we're trying to affect more broadly. That makes sense. So how do we do this? On the own side of things, we allow data to drive our insights. So tools like Ahrefs or Majestic or Moz or various others that are out there will help you to identify whether the need is for a quality or quantity of links, or maybe a bit of both. So we can use kind of competitor insights, look at things like the graphic here is from Ahrefs showing the URL rating distribution of a website that I was reviewing recently. Obviously, we can see from this that they've got only very poor quality links, so the requirement for them is quality, whereas there are other clients where maybe they're earlier on in their link building journey and actually they need quantity more than anything. But it's important that we define what we're trying to achieve and what success looks like from an owned perspective. And equally from a shared perspective, data can inform us. So we use things like search metrics or similar kinds of tools that can show us how our clients have been affected maybe by algorithm updates, or we speak closely with the SEO team at Impression or with the SEO team at the client side to understand what are the challenges that our clients facing, what are the opportunities for growth, and how does our PR strategy feed into that. And it's also really important when we're defining what success looks like and setting these goals that we are fair in the KPIs that we set for ourselves as well. So KPI is an acronym that means Key Performance Indicator. And I think I've worked agency side for over a decade now, and I know that quite often we work in monthly reporting phases. So the expectation can sometimes be there that you're going to be able to report on results every single month. And actually, PR is a long-term strategy. So whilst we do want to be looking out for those short-term wins, we should also recognise that quite often we're not going to be achieving those big kind of influxes of links and things every single week or every single month. It's important that we take a long-term view as well. And also remembering that a key performance indicator isn't just the end result. So we can still show indications of our performance through things like our ability to meet deadlines along the way. So that means we've got to be really great project managers. But it's just about setting really fair KPIs every step of our journey. And that's my first takeaway from this talk, is that we need to define what success looks like in a meaningful way. So ensure that your team and your client are in agreement and set clear deadlines and metrics. And what this does is it enables us to really celebrate the things that we are successful in. I remember one of my colleagues had been working on a campaign with a client where it did so phenomenally well. And, it got over 100 different links and it was really exciting. The client was really excited. And then the next month, because we were preparing a new campaign, we didn't get any links that month. And I remember the client being so happy when we got hundreds and then so miserable when we didn't get any. And it was actually, if we just defined what success looks like and set his expectations of what he could expect to see, that relationship would have been, much more positive, and it would have been a much fairer reflection on what we do. So define what success looks like and make sure that we're being judged fairly. The next thing that I want to do then in helping you move towards more successful PR campaigns is to think about how we can create strategies that facilitate that success. Now, one of the things that we do at Impression is we take quite a methodical approach to really analysing what our clients' needs are. So the first thing that we'll do is to identify the link requirements. This is something that I've already touched on briefly earlier on in the talk, but what we want to do is define whether the client needs a good quality of links, or if they're looking more for quantity, or if they need both. And that requirement could come from their SEO strategy, it could come from their broader marketing aspirations, but it's really, really important that we identify what that link requirement is first. Next, we want to agree the specifics. So are there any specific keywords that we're trying to influence through our work? Are there any other KPIs that we need to make sure that we are aware of? Things like trying to capture more audience data, for example, or if we're trying to move into a certain subset of the media. The third thing that we do then is to collaborate on ideas. So it's really important to us that we understand what our clients want to talk about and that we're putting out content they can be really proud of every step of the way. And finally, understanding the landscape. So we always take the time to analyse the link or coverage potential, to look at the publications in which our clients are hoping to feature, to look at their industry, their sector, competitor research, to really understand what does that media landscape look like. And therefore, we can appreciate where there are going to be opportunities for us to drive, really great high volumes of links quite consistently, and where we're actually operating in maybe a trickier industry or a trickier segment of the target media, where it's going to take a little bit longer, and we know that success for that particular client might not come from volume of links and coverage. We also recognise that there is a whole spectrum of opportunity out there. And for us, one of the things that we do to create campaign strategies that have the best chance of success is to take advantage of these different areas of digital PR. So one of the things that I really love about our job is that there are so many different things that we can do. And Alex was talking about kind of newsjacking, which is one of the things that kind of sits at the kind of quicker wins end of things, sitting on Twitter, seeing what's coming up in the news, pitching in comments is a really integral part of a strategy, right through to the bigger stuff like the Future Gamer and the Dream Jobs pieces and kind of bigger interactives and creative campaigns. We've got this whole breadth of things that we can be doing. And I think it's very easy to really focus our celebrations on those things which we consider to be, for want of a better word, the sexier areas of digital PR. So those big interactives, those big creative campaigns, and actually there's a whole spectrum of opportunity out there. So we as a team really focus on making use of all the potential opportunities and potential formats that are going to help our client reach their goals. And within that, we also layer our approach. So this is something that we really advocate at Impression and something that our clients enjoy too, but it's also it's not just about kind of mitigating risk by having various things going on at once, but if we think about how Google works and how kind of concepts like link velocity still play a part in search engine results, we need to be making sure that the backlink profiles we build for our clients look nice and natural. So we don't want to just have those sudden influxes of links every couple of months. What we want to do is have things going on all the time. So what we do is to layer our approach, whereby we might have kind of one big creative campaign, a few different topical themes through which we're pitching in smaller campaign ideas, and then maybe that reactive piece that sits underneath. It's also important to think about long-term strategies. So I've already mentioned that PR is not a short-term tactic. It has to focus on kind of the long-term as well. This is an example of a campaign that it's not by me, actually. It's by Digitaloft, who Abi works for, and it was shared by James Brockbank a little while ago. And what I was really interested in is that I remember this campaign when it went live, and I remember thinking, I think this is going to do really, really well. And what we can see in the chart here is, and this is taken from Ahrefs, is that in the initial days of the campaign's launch, it picked up a few links and it kind of bumbled along until quite recently, back in kind of May, June time, when it really, really took off. Now, if you were setting KPIs for that client and you were solely judging on the ability to drive links kind of as each month goes by, you would lose the potential opportunities of being able to resell in campaigns like this and really drive the full value of them. So I think it's really key that as digital PRs, we're not restricted by the frameworks of agency life and by the requirements to do monthly reporting, but we're able to set in place longer term strategies that enable us to kind of get a bit of success here and a bit of success there and revisit things and really capitalize on the value of them as the media landscape changes. Along similar lines, this is a campaign that I worked on at Impression, and what we did with this one was to create a lot of different angles. So as well as thinking long term about how you can sell your campaigns in over time, you should also be thinking about how you can give your campaigns the best chance of success by making sure you have plenty of angles that you can sell in. So for this particular campaign, we called it World Powers, and we looked at the difference in energy prices around the world. And we calculated the cost of a kilowatt hour of energy. Then we found out how many kilowatt hours of energy are required to do various things around the home. And we created this big piece comparing the cost of standard kind of daily activities around the globe. Off the back of that, because it was global, we had so many angles that we could take out to different countries and different international publications. And because it had so many facets to it, where we looked at things like charging electric vehicles, charging your laptop, charging your kettle to make a cup of tea, charging your phone, all those sorts of things, it meant that we had so many angles, we could just keep on going and keep on selling it in. And it's also really important to give yourself time. So one of the things that we've really learned over lockdown in particular is that because we had to reshape the way that many of our strategies looked, we had to be much more agile and much more able to kind of use things that we already had. And, you know, everyone faced it. It was a big challenge that everyone had to go through. And one of the things that we've really learned from it is that we need to give ourselves more time to make our campaigns work. What that has meant in a practical sense is that we're just planning out more time for things like outreach, for example, knowing that if we can keep on going, we can keep on getting links. Whereas before, we might have been so excited about the next campaign that's coming up that we might have just kind of left that one and gone, oh, that's done all right, let's move on. These days, we're much more likely to say, no, let's make sure we've planned enough time to give that particular campaign the focus and the time that it deserves. So my next takeaway then from this section, talking about creating campaigns with the best chance of success, is to really own your strategy to give yourself that good chance. That means investing enough time into everything that you're doing, working collaboratively, and layering to reduce your risk, making sure that you've got plenty of kind of space within your strategy to recognize that not every single campaign is going to be the best campaign ever, but that over time, failure is not an option. Our clients deserve success, and that means sculpting strategies which are going to enable you to have those big hitters and overall making sure that your KPIs are fair so that you've got a really good chance of reaching them. And finally, I want to talk about how we can reflect and learn to make sure we give ourselves the best chance of success moving forward. So it's really important that we're able to be bold in our reflection. And as I mentioned, some campaigns inevitably do better than others. And it's really important that we set clear expectations and targets to allow ourselves to be judged and to judge ourselves in a fair way. So this particular chart here is, it shows some work that I've been doing with a client over the past quarter. And the targets for some of these campaigns, we well surpassed them, whereas others didn't do as well as we'd expected. But that's an expectation that we had in advance. So by recognizing that not every campaign is going to work as well as you'd hope, you create strategies that enable you to have those kind of dips and troughs, but overall things go well. So it's really important that you set those clear expectations and then be really bold in your reflection. Be bold enough to pull apart your own campaigns, as well as celebrating your success, and allow others to do the same. One of the things I'm really proud of at Impression is that we've got a very collaborative culture, and it's a very, for want of a better word, it's a very safe space where we can all kind of say to each other, I loved that about your campaign, or I didn't enjoy that, I don't know if this is going to work. And we kind of approach each other and say, I'm worried about this is stressful for me, I don't know what I'm going to do, can you help? By opening ourselves up and being bold in our reflections and not taking it personally, we can set ourselves up for success moving forward. Making sure we measure against predefined goals as well is really important. So there's power in being able to measure against those things that we've laid out in terms of our own owned and shared goals, so we know what success looks like every step of the way. And finally, be inspired. This is something that Alex touched on as well in his talk, and I think one of my favourite things about our industry is that people are so willing to share their successes. So allow yourself to be inspired. Some of the things that inspire me are shown on this slide, and it includes things like the Brighton SEO podcast and the Impression blog. I've got a Twitter list of digital PR people who are all amazing. Follow them. And if you go to the link that I've popped at the bottom corner of this screen, there's a list of more stuff that inspires me there as well. So takeaway number 3, it's really embrace the challenge. We have a difficult job. We work in a difficult industry, but rather than looking at making failure okay, let's focus on what's going to drive our success and really embrace the challenge. And as the dog says, you got this. So what I've talked about today, firstly, how to define what success looks like in a meaningful way. So the framework that we use at Impression is to talk about owned goals and shared goals and make sure that we've really defined what those targets look like. What works for you might be a little bit different, but I think the key thing is just make sure that you've really defined what success looks like. I talked about how to craft strategies that have the best chance of success. So things like multiple angles, layering your strategies, and giving yourself enough time are so important. And finally, how to reflect and learn. Be bold in your reflections. Don't take things personally. Don't be afraid to say, I don't like this, I don't think this is going to work, but equally be open to celebrating successes and being inspired. I hope that's been useful. Those are my contact details. Feel free to get in touch, and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much for that talk. That was fascinating. Really, really, really great. I had just one quick question if you've got time. We've not got too long, but sorry, I've got the wrong slide up. There we go. Yeah. So in terms, you talked about like the timelines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you go about managing expectations in terms of that? Because I'm guessing a lot of this work can take a bit longer than the average client might expect. Is that sometimes a challenge to kind of say this might take quite a while, but it'll be worth it? Or
no, I wouldn't say so. And don't get me wrong. What I'm saying when I talk about kind of long-term strategies is not that you should be happy with spending the first 8 months of a 12-month contract planning and then jump on it on month 9. Absolutely not. I think the way that we make sure that our clients are getting value every step of the way is that we do incorporate kind of quicker wins. And, you know, Alex talked about how he came up with a campaign, the baby names thing, where he had a bit of downtime due to a client's delay. So you can kind of pop up quite quick campaigns, and we try and tie that in with the longer term ones. So with the particular client that I'm working with at the moment, for example, we have got a campaign strategy whereby we've got one kind of larger hero campaign that happens every quarter, and then we've got smaller campaigns underlying that and layering that. So the expectation has been set that these bigger ones are going to come every quarter, but that we've got smaller ones going on every step of the way. And I think it's really just about defining what that success looks like so that everyone's on the same page and everyone can judge each other fairly.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. Thank you for sharing your work with us and taking your time out of your working day.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. I'll
Thank you.
hope to see you next time.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Okay, well, that just about does it for part 3 of Sheffield DM's All Day. Thank you very much once again to all 3 of our special guests for the digital PR segment. And thank you very much to you for tuning in. We'll be back at 2:30, so in about 20 minutes for our 4th and final part, which will feature a specialist talk and Q&A discussion panel where our guests will be talking about personal branding in digital marketing. We hope you can join us for that. The link to part 4 is in the description of this video. We will see you then.